Welcome to the State of Survival. Return to Moria is a game based in the Lord of the Rings universe. But the question is the lore canon from Return to Moria? We're going to go ahead and be exploring this game's lore and the depth of the lore inside of Return to Moria and see what we can find out about it. Well, folks, we are talking about the lore of the Lord of the Rings, and in the Return to Moria, we are by no means any experts, and we're often reading from lore we found online, from the books and the movies, and are using the best knowledge we have. So, the Return to Moria game starts off in the future after the One Ring has been destroyed, and it's actually Gimli from the Fellowship who is leading a venture party to go ahead and take back the mines of Moria because he's gotten sick of waiting for a person called Durin. Who is Durin?
So Durin is actually the father of dwarves, or the father of the Longbeards, also known as Durin's folk. Um, the dwarves believe that Durin gets reincarnated over the years. Durin the First actually established Moria, also known as Khazad-dûm. Moria is actually not its original name. Khazad-dûm is, and that is the dwarf mansion. And he founded Dwarven the First. Durin the First founded Moria, and it's been passed down through the dwarves for generations. The Balrog, which we'll talk about later, is actually the one that killed Durin the Sixth, which precedes the Durin that Gimli is waiting for in the game.
I'm a little bit confused here. If they're waiting for him to be reborn or reincarnated or whatever, is during the second, third, fourth, and all the way to the sixth, Durin like truly reborn, or what's going on here?
So, from my understanding, it was Durin reborn through reincarnation. But something that you pointed out to me in the research and all this was that the dwarves believe that they would preserve the body of Durin, or I think even other like dwarven figures throughout history, and their spirit would return to that body eventually and raise that body up, and Durin would come back.
But what made them want to settle on Khazal Doom, as you said its name was back when they were making it?
So Durin made a journey down through the Misty Mountains, and there is a lake that was eventually dubbed the Mirror that he looked down into as he was at the edge of, I think, the east gate of where Moria would be founded. And as he looked down into this lake, he saw a reflection of himself, and above his head he saw a crown of seven stars, and he took that as a good sign. So he went from that lake and he went into the Misty Mountains, and that's where he started mining and digging and founding the kingdom of Moria, or Khazad-dûm.
So, does that explain why this game was so easily able to be made about returning to Moria? Why Gimli's so obsessed with taking back Moria because it's their home?
Well, I don't think that Durin necessarily has anything to do with the reason why Gimli is taking it back. Because if you watch the opening scene, and you hear Gimli's narration and all that, when they get to the scene where they actually show the mines and they show the dwarves about to go in the mines, you can hear another dwarf actually talking to Gimli and trying to talk him out of the venture because they're waiting on Durin the Seventh. But the importance of Gimli and any other dwarf even separate from the game lore, the actual written lore of Middle Earth, the dwarves are constantly trying to take back Moria because it's their first city, it's their big city, it's their mansion, it's the greatest, it's the biggest, most splendorous city that they have. That's why they call it the Dwarven Mansion. I mean, it spanned the entire Misty Mountains.
So, if you were to compare the Misty Mountains to another mountain range in real life, what kind of mountain range would it be? Would it be like the Himalayas or something like that?
When you if you watch the movies, it was going to take them forever to go up and over the mountains, and and they went through Moria instead. And the movies don't even do it justice. That's where I get a lot of my knowledge is from the movies. But Moria had seven layers above the East Gate and seven layers below the East Gate. So this is
Mm.
15, 14, 15 layers tall on top of spanning the distance of this vast mountain range.
Now, I did read, speaking about the movies, that the journey actually through Moria for the Fellowship took them like 2 weeks to get through it, which is just crazy because I did read from maybe a little bit of fan fiction that even if they did a straight shot, it still would have been at least a week minimum to go straight through Moria if they went from A to B. So that's just how big it is from what I understand. Now, this is really interesting that they're wanting to take it back, and you've said that they've taken it back or wanted to take it back multiple times. What actually made them lose the Mines of Moria? What drove the dwarfs out of there in the first place?
Well, the first time they were driven out was by the Balrog. In the movies, they reference digging too deep and awakening this thing, and I think they actually reference that in the game as well. But eventually, they do dig so deep for what they're digging for in Moria that they awaken the Balrog, and the Balrog kills Durin the Sixth. It actually kills another Dwarven king. This name slips my mind, but after the second Dwarven king is killed, they abandon Moria because it's too dangerous. Because the Balrog is just wreaking havoc. That's actually around the same time that the elves gave Khazad-dûm the name Moria, which means the Black Pit.
And one of the things that we've learned is they're having gaining access to Moria because the door that they originally went through with Gimli and the Fellowship no longer is opening to the speak friend and enter that they used originally to gain access with Frodo and Gandalf.
Well, I believe that's the exact door that they are trying to go in the game. And I know for a fact that once the explosion happens and you're in the mines and you're waking up and you're coming to and trying to figure out what happened, your first quest is to turn around and go back to Durin's door, which is that gate that the fellowship went through. And you find it sealed with those runes and the shadow and everything. And that's your first glimpse of whatever shadow is in Moria in the game is through Durin's door, and that's where the Fellowship came. That door was open for years for elves in written lore, because the dwarves traded with elves. But it's
And that
after
was back in
Sauron.
time, right?
Oh yeah, that was back in all the way up to the Second Age, until Sauron attacked, and the dwarves went and helped Elrond fight Sauron. And then when they left that fight, they retreated back into the mines of Moria and shut that gate, and it remained shut until the Fellowship opened it.
Inside the game, have you actually found snippets of lore that actually are interesting or kind of fall inside with Lord of the Rings itself?
Two of my favorite things that I've found in the game so far that I really enjoy because there are things that I didn't know until I played the game and did some research on it. One of which is, you remember the runes you find throughout the game. There you find them every now and then. Just a small glowing blue rune on a pillar somewhere, and you
Oh
read it.
yeah, I remember those.
They're wizard runes. It's from Gandalf. Gandalf left those
Oh.
before the fellowship in the written lore. Before the fellowship came through Moria, Gandalf actually went into Moria looking for Thrain, one of the king of the dwarves, who also went back to try to take Moria at one point. And I assume vanished. He just disappeared. He never came out. So Gandalf went back to look for Thrain. So those runes in the game are actually from Gandalf, and it's signed Gandalf, wizard looking for Thrain, or some such like that.
So that makes sense why Gandalf during the movies was kind of hesitant to go back in. But the question is how did he get in if not through the doors they originally went in?
Number two is there's pages you find that are from a ranger's journal. Now, I haven't been able to read those pages yet because, from what I can tell, you have to actually find the journal itself and place the pages in it in order to read it. But I think those might be from Aragorn, because in written lore as well, Aragorn also makes a trip into Moria that we don't know why or exactly when, but at some point before the Fellowship goes through, he makes a trip into and through Moria for some reason. And I think those pages you find in the game are possibly his journals. That's the connection I'm making because that's what makes sense in my head. I haven't found the full journal and the full pages, so I don't know that for sure. But that's kind of the parallels I'm drawing between written lore and the game lore, which excites me to find more about it and find out if that's actually right.
Oh, I love it. Now, there's a lot of orcs and half orcs and goblins and half goblin men and other creatures inside of there. Does that play into Lord of the Rings lore about the mines? Because I did read from what you have told me a little bit that some people tried to inhabit it again.
Yes, it's the last one of the last battles in Moria that takes place um before they actually take it back. But it's an expedition party that I think they held Moria for actually they held an eastern section of Moria for a couple of years before orcs came in and attacked once again, and no one was able to escape that. It was dwarves that were living there for
Dang.
several years, but they weren't actually able to take the full city back because of the Balrog and then because of the orcs coming in and just decimating them.
That is crazy to think about. Now, in the game, you end up having to go kind of this weird journey throughout the mines, and you often come across kind of these weird purple mist around certain areas of the doors blocking you from progressing further in one direction or another. Is that kind of like magical stuff? Like maybe remnants of the Balrog?
It makes me think it's
Yeah.
not necessarily the Balrog, that there's something else going on. You can't in the game, you actually can't start getting rid of any of that shadow until you get down to I think they call it like the deep mines or the gem section or something like that. Once you get down there, there's actually you start finding things called Durin's lamp. And once you get the
Ooh.
equipment where you can repair Durin's lamp, you can start ridding the mines of some of that shadow. And I think that's where the actual lore behind the shadow and the explanation is going to start happening. I in my playthrough, I don't have enough stuff and equipment to fix Durin's lamps yet. I just now started finding them, so I don't know exactly like where that shadow is going to go or what's going to come of it. But it excites me to find out because that's going to be another piece of information that I don't know that may connect to written lore, or it may be something new that I completely wasn't expecting to come out of this game.
That's actually really cool to hear about because it also brings me to my other question. In the very early sets of the game, you end up finding tons of what looks like shops and other things inside of the mines. And while you've talked about the mines being this massive, cavern carved area, it really kind of shows that there's a lot of it that was lived in the game. How much of this actual portrayal in the game actually is what you think you would see?
This was the dwarves' most splendid cities. It's one of the reasons why they wanted to take it back so bad. It was the biggest, most splendid cities. There's actually a section of other dwarves that weren't Durin folk that, when they were driven from home, came down to Moria and helped design this. They were blacksmiths. They were masons. They helped carve these cities and they helped carve these outcroppings. And even the elven city that you see in Mines of Moria, I think it's like the second area you get to. I don't know that that ever exists in written lore, but we do know that the elves traveled through and traded with the dwarves, so that's possible. It's possible that you would see things like that in that, but that's an example of the things that the dwarves could do in Moria and in this dwarven mansion that can expand. And it's things that make me more excited to see what's deeper down in. Because while the mines of Moria were mines, they were built to mine Mithril. It was also built as the dwarves' biggest and most splendid city.
Now, as you progress further in the game, you end up getting to the true mines of Moria. I believe that there's a Pacific area. Do you remember the name of the area that you get to? It's like a pretty big area.
I think they just call it the mines of Moria. Actually, I think there's a section
Ah,
called the mines of Moria. And it's just I think it's where you're talking about where it's before the crystal cavern, and it's just this you're kind of like somewhat on the ground floor. There's a little ways you can go down, but if you look up, there's just this vast opening above you. Fun fact, I finally noticed that vast opening above me, and I noticed a lot of scaffolding over there that you could climb. And in the research of all of this, I watched one guy talk about some tips and tricks and stuff, and he said you should explore all the buildings and stuff, even if it looks like you can't get to it, because there might be secrets. There might be little Easter eggs hidden on all these upper levels and stuff that you can't just walk to. So I
yeah.
built my way up. I climbed the ladders. I took the dangerous jumps and barely caught onto the ledges and pulled my little dwarven butt up there, just by the hair of my beard. Just barely made it. There was nothing up there. I didn't find anything.
Aw. But it was fun, right?
It was fun, and it was really cool to get to
Uh,
the top and be able to look down and kind of have like a bird's eye view of everything below that. But yeah, I was really hoping to find something really cool up there after all that climbing, which is fine. There doesn't have to be something special around every corner.
yeah, and my next question about all this cool stuff is because we know dwarfs didn't do everything. They always specialized in something. The Great Forge over in the Elven Quarter, just slightly past it. Is that something that would have been seen in like Lord of the Rings, where they had this massive forge that was capable of producing certain kinds of metal or whatever? You know the one I'm talking about, where you have to repair it and get it going again.
Yeah,
Is that
Narvi's
something that you
forge.
would see in Lord of the Rings? Yeah.
I I
Oh yeah.
I personally like to imagine these big forges like that. And Narvi, I believe Narvi's the one that helped build Doran's doors, the ones that you speak for and enter. So he was a great craftsman dwarf. He I can imagine that actually being his forge in the mines of Moria where you can build the special equipment because you don't go to that forge and just build, a steel sword or an iron sword. Like that's where you go to build the special backpacks, the special spears, the special shields. That's where you go to build the the first age pickaxe that lets you
Yeah.
mine precious stone and stuff like that. You gotta get the specialty tools from this great craftsman's forge. Even if that's not in written lore, I think that's a wise choice for a game to have because it makes not only makes those tools feel special, but it makes that area feel special and it draws attention to that craftsman because, like I said, Narvi was a great craftsman of the dwarves in Middle Earth.
I think that the effort and time they spent trying to make the game feel like it belonged in the Lord of the Rings universe and trying to give it that kind of background with Gimli and the other dwarfs. Not all of them answering the call, and some of them being stubborn, some of them wanting Durin to return before they retook Moria, and all the other kind of like storyline they put inside there, along with the other little treasure troves you find, having to repair Durin's axe, and a couple of other nuggets, really makes the game, while not 100% canon, really feel like they tried to immerse this again in Lord of the Rings universe.
Yeah, I don't think that it connects enough to written lore to make it quote unquote canon, but they have enough pieces of canon information or things that are built off enough canon information that feel like it could happen. Um, I don't think Gimli ever went to actually take over Moria, but it feels like Gimli seems like it's someone that would go do that. I don't think Durin's axe was ever broken, but Durin's axe was an artifact that the dwarves recovered in written lore. So it feels like that's a possibility too. Aragorn, like I said, those journal pages, I'm assuming they're from Aragorn. That's what I think. That's my theory. That seems like
Nice.
it could be something he left there. We find the carvings and the runes of Gandalf. That's something Gandalf could have left there. So I think while this is not exactly canon, I think they took enough from canon and enough from the actual lore and sprinkled it throughout the game that it doesn't feel like they just went and made another Lord of the Rings game that's, out in left field that doesn't mean anything. It feels like you're a dwarf in the mines of Moria actually doing something in the Lord of the Rings universe, which I think is something that some of the Lord of the Rings games in the past have missed the mark on.
And that begs the question to our community. Do you feel the return of Moria hit the mark when it came to the lore and immersed yourself in the Lord of the Rings universe? Or did they fail? Well, folks, thank you very much for joining us today on State of Survival, where we talked about the lore of Return to Moria and its amazing influence from Lord of the Rings. We appreciate you all coming and viewing us, and thank you for taking your time. Don't forget, our co-host I mentioned takes his time to do this for us, and his Twitch link is down below, along with his YouTube. And don't forget to thank our producer, Red Falcon, for his effort and time he puts into the podcast. Thank you very much, and all have a wonderful day. Ta-ta for now.